Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Andres, and today I have something a little bit different. This channel, for the most part, I've just been making wrestling content almost exclusively, and I have not been watching as much wrestling as I did before. I do still keep up with pretty much everything, but recently I've been reading a manga that I've really enjoyed, and I just figured, what the heck, I really wanted to talk about it. I don't really have anyone in my life to talk about it with, so might as well talk to the camera. But yeah, this is not gonna be an extensive analysis of the manga Blood on the Tracks, which I do actually have a copy of this here, of the first volume. But this won't be an extensive analysis, as I said. This will be more so a just overall thoughts and opinions about it. I will give a short summary before I begin with everything. So just keep in mind, if you haven't read Blood on the Tracks, and I guess if you don't care about not reading it, then go ahead, watch the video. But if you do care about spoilers, I'll be spoiling most of it. But yeah, the basic summary of the story Blood on the Tracks is essentially, it's about a sheltered, very sheltered boy, sheltered mama's boy. And it's mostly about him and his mom. His dad is in the picture, but he's kind of like a very stereotypical salary man that just works late hours. He owns like his own business. But yeah, it's about like the relationship he has and the kind of like events that unfold between him, his mom, and specifically his cousin. And there's a big turning point in the story where his mom pushes his cousin off a cliff, and his this little kid is, or this teenage boy is watching as she does this, and it kind of spirals into other things that happen later on in the story, and it's kind of just like the push, for lack of a better word, to onto like this like declining mental health state of the main character Seiichi. But yeah, overall, I thought this manga was just absolutely fantastic. I feel that it really hit on some themes that are very akin to more so like traditional literature. I would say it gets very dark, so if you're on the fence about reading it, just keep in mind there's a lot of, I guess, a trigger warning, a lot of language about abuse, some kind of like incestual relationship stuff, not like completely overt, but and a lot of like sexual content, because I mean, he's a teenager, he's going through puberty. But a lot of the themes I picked up on are like loss of innocence in the story. Seiichi's mom, I felt like represented pureness in a lot of ways, because she always sees him with disdain when he like has a wet dream, and she finds his soiled underwear in the laundry room. And also, I feel like there's a contrast between this and Fukishi, who's Seiichi's main love interest in his teenage years, because Fukishi's trying to kind of explore, get him out to come out of his shell as a teenager. So I feel like she more so represents the actual loss of innocence and kind of like becoming an adult, or this transition of adulthood. And then as for like Seiichi's relationship with his mom, Seiichi's mom, I in a lot of ways I took it as her seeing him as some kind of like MacGuffin or toy or a device to get her to be happy. Basically, she later on in the story, we finally get a background on how she's lived her life, and it does provide a lot of context. But she essentially talks about how she hasn't really been fully happy. Essentially, one of the only things that made her happy in life was acting. But she got in a relationship with Seiichi's father, and then she just progressed along, and she had to quit like acting, because she was like getting married, and they moved to his hometown. And there's this talk about her like trying to find happiness, and Seiichi's aunt keeps pushing like, you guys should have a baby, because having a child, you will like, your focus won't be on yourself anymore. Your focus will be on your child, so you basically won't be thinking these thoughts about how like your life is slowly deteriorating and you're not doing anything with it. So they end up having a child, and for her, I feel like she sees Seiichi, that child, as I said, as like a toy, as like this device that should bring her happiness and should bring her joy, but really doesn't, because she's empty inside. Obviously, there's a lot of ways you could take it, like she's clinically depressed, or also she suffered a lot of abuse and like neglect from her parents, because of a lot of background with her younger sister, who was like ill for most of her life, so their focus was on her rather than Seiichi's mom growing up. So there's a lot you can take from that, but I took it at a ground level, base level. She feels empty inside, and Seiichi is supposed to be this toy or this device that makes her happy, that should make her happy, but really doesn't. And their relationship as a whole is really interesting. I think it's the author does such a good job at portraying emotional manipulation in a lot of ways, and like abuse, mental abuse, obviously, like in particular. The way she talks to him, the way she says a lot of times when there's some kind of like tension between them, or she's trying to convince him to do something, she resorts to saying like, I don't care, I just want to die. And whether she does it on purpose, I think this is another thing the author does really well. I don't think she does it on purpose in the story. It's more so that this is who she is. She's like depressed. She doesn't really care about anything. She'll react, and when things are not going her way in this fashion, where she's like, oh no, I don't really care, I'd rather just die. But that will push Seiichi as a teenage boy. He loves his mom, and he has this kind of weird relationship with her, so that will push him to kind of distort his thoughts and his opinions. And I think another thing the author does such a good job at is showing how someone can give you some input, give you a line like, oh, I don't care about myself, I just want to die. And then you take it in and you interpret things. Your mind goes a million like miles an hour, and you take it from there. Like in his mind, he's like, oh, this is all my fault, because I was born, she couldn't achieve what she wanted to achieve, or like maybe she's also trying to manipulate me and she's doing it on purpose. Like his mind, the way he portrays Seiichi's mind is really well done, and how like his inner dialogue of everything, it really like just takes you into those paranoid states, especially when the person you love the most, even in an unhealthy way, is suffering. You just scramble to find any reasons how this can like go back to you in a lot of ways. There's also a big symbolic thing about the pushing and killing your old self in the story, because we get the turning point moment, right, is Seiichi's mom pushing Seiichi's cousin. But we find out later on in the story that earlier, when Seiichi was just a young boy, Seiichi's mom, I guess she kind of was done with him in a lot of ways. She was disgruntled. She wasn't happy in life. She felt she like wasted everything essentially. And so she goes up a hill and just drops him and pushes him off the cliff. He survives, but this theme keeps coming back of like, this being kind of a killing your inside. But then I think interesting, there's another layer to it, which is the cycles of abuse in the story, because Seiichi, we get Seiichi's mom, Seiko. She has had an abusive relationship with her parents. She was neglected, as I mentioned, but also she's become abusive towards Seiichi, her own son, as well. So there's a cycle of abuse, and then he also, is having these similar traits as his mom as he's growing up, as he's becoming a teenager, even as an adult later on in the story. He has inherited a lot of this like generational trauma, I guess is the way to put it. And it's a really good highlight of it in the story, generational trauma we all have it to some degree. I have it, you have it, we we all have had it, even if it's a minor or very major in some cases. We all have a part of it, because there's just no way. Our parents aren't perfect, their parents aren't perfect. We as people are flawed, and we have things that at the time maybe we don't think about that we're doing to our offspring, our children, that later on they think about, and they think how messed up it was. Obviously in this story it's much more overt, like literally his mom pushed him off a cliff and tried to kill him essentially as a kid. But yeah, we all have some kind of generational trauma. I will say one critique I have of the story as a whole is I do not like, and I feel like this happens a lot in manga and anime, but I do not like over explaining the themes, and just like having characters literally ramble about how exactly we should be interpreting things. I will say in general, as I said, some people, I feel like with a lot of manga and anime, the inner dialogue and monologue, they might get used to it. I never have gotten used to it personally. And there's as the story goes along, there's like his, I guess I'll call it the prison arc, where Seiichi goes to prison or juvie for pushing his cousin, and he literally sits with investigators and kind of talks about it and has those moments where he kind of is explaining all these things as they are. And just for me personally, I just don't really like it when I'm beaten over the head with these things. I want to kind of have space to interpret, because I am of the belief that any kind of art and media as a whole can be interpreted the way you want to interpret it. If you can make a cohesive argument about things that are happening, then if you can convince people, then it's rightfully so. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no, even if the author tells you, no, you're wrong, this is how I thought about things when I wrote it, I think even then you can still explain away other things in very different interpretations. So for me personally, I just don't like it when authors in general just flat out tell you how things are and what exactly he was thinking in this moment, and what his interpretation of things are. So it's not like the worst. Obviously it doesn't happen as much. It's still a fantastic story, but that would be my only knock at this story. I guess another knock, sorry, before I keep going, is I do feel like there are several points in the story where it could have ended. Now looking back, the ending I think is a really good ending, but I feel like in the prison moment, it could have ended, or when he pushed his cousin off, it felt like a moment where it could have ended as well, or when he becomes an adult and meets his dad again, and his mom, it could have ended. Like there's several moments in the several points in the story where it could have just concluded and I would have been satisfied. I will say the one thing that this story does that's interesting is, I think as it goes along, a lot of my thoughts and my interpretations and what I'm supposed to take away from the story do kind of change. So as I said, my initial mentality about it is kind of thinking about this relationship of abusers and how they, in generational trauma, and the cycles of abuse that happen in families. But then it kind of evolves into a more like thinking about specifically how you can get out of this specifically, and how you can get away from these cycles, and how long it takes a lot of times to get away from these cycles. Because later, like by the end, I mean, we see Seiichi throughout different points in his life. The bulk of the story is of in his teenage years. We see him as an adult. He meets his father again. His father is very apologetic about everything that's happened. He tries to help, doesn't, he's not the person that caused this grief and this pain to Seiichi, so I don't think, he can do much, unfortunately. But by the end, honestly, it feels good, because Seiichi does sympathize with his father, and feels bad about what his father has gone through as well. But then he eventually finds his mom, because like his mom is in kind of this delirium kind of like state where she remembers things, doesn't remember things, is just kind of moving on with life, not really like she's in a bad mental state essentially. Um, but she he like she ends up telling her story, and I think it does get to him to some degree. When he as an adult hearing her story, I don't know if he fully sympathizes with her, but it does kind of in some ways close that chapter in his life. But at that point, he's in his 30s. The next before the ending of the story is him probably in his 50s or 60s as like a old man, where he's talking about how he barely remembers his mother anymore, which to me, kind of the way I interpret that is him being like, I'm finally past that point of like this trauma getting to me, which to me just exhibits how persistent this it truly is. I mean, for most people in reality, this trauma lasts their entire lives, and their children inherit it, and it just keeps compounding. In his case, I guess, in a lot of ways, at that point, he seems to have moved on and stopped being this really like down and depressed person that had like given up on everything in his like 20s and 30s after everything that he went through with his mom. But yeah, overall, as I said, I think it's a really good story. I would highly recommend you guys to read it. As I said, it's definitely a trigger warning. It's a very dark story. A lot of talk about abuse, a lot of like sexual topics. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it made me think a lot. It made me emotional at a lot of points in the story. And I'm sorry about the nature of this video. I didn't really structure it in any way. It might be like a rambling mess that doesn't make any sense at all, and there's no structure to it. I originally wasn't planning to, I guess, make a video about this manga, but when you start reading something and you feel like it's so good, I guess in my case, I'll start reading something, I'll feel it's like really good, and I just really want to talk about it, and I just start writing notes. So I just decided, what the heck, I'll just make a video about it. But yeah, let me know what if you guys have checked out this manga, and what you think about it. What were some of your interpretations on it? And if you have any recommendations for future mangas, obviously, yeah, definitely leave them in the comments. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.